Hello, welcome to the Intentional Evolution Podcast. I am your host, Vision Battlesword, integral consultant and founder of I Evolve Life, a personal and professional development practice based on the philosophy of intentional evolution. This podcast is an ongoing conversation to explore that philosophy, as well as to serve as a resource, a showcase, and a catalyst for ongoing growth toward the human singularity. That is to say, mass awakening of new consciousness, superintelligence, and radical creative flourishing. Each episode I'll feature a world-class transformational facilitator, co-creator, or friend to reveal cutting-edge psycho-spiritual technology, unpack our deepest wisdom, and evolve our awareness. This series is based on value for value, so whatever value you receive from these transmissions, please return some value back in the form of a donation, directly supporting our contributors, or offering your own time and talent as a producer. Thanks for joining me in this journey, and now, here's our episode. Welcome back, Porch.
Hey.
How are you doing?
I'm pretty good. Yeah, it's great to be back. Love our conversations.
Yeah, I do too. And our previous conversation on relationship, where we just kind of like popped the cork of this giant ephemeral concept and tried to figure it out, which actually one of my friends described listening to that episode that we did as he felt like he took an impromptu LSD trip, like as we just kind of weaved and threaded through the multiverse of ideas about what relationship even is and how we could define it, which was super, super fun for me. And I think we also did a lot of really interesting play working our way toward a working definition of meta relating and intentional autonomous relating and some of these kind of big picture concepts in the bodies of work that we've been creating over these past several years. Yeah. And so I've been waiting for myself. I've been looking forward to having a follow-up conversation with you. And so here we are. We've kind of framed up a topic for how we can kind of take our exploration into relationships into literally a completely different dimension and direction.
Yeah.
So I'm just excited to kind of roll up my sleeves and jump in here with you and see what we can figure out.
Awesome. I'm excited. Let's do it.
Well, as always, I'd just love to ask you to introduce yourself in your own way and in your own words. Who are you, Michael Porcelli?
I am a relationship nerd. I'm a coach, a facilitator. I've been a trainer of facilitators. I've created a body of work I call meta relating, which is basically how to develop relational intelligence. And yeah, I have a former career as an engineer. So I kind of brought some of my engineering mindset and then my study of psychology and personal growth. I got a master's degree in spiritual psychology. I kind of merged them together and out came meta relating. That's the short version.
Awesome. Well, I'm Vision Battlesword. I am the host of the Intentional Evolution podcast, as well as one of the creators of this entire philosophy, I guess you would say, what I call intentional evolution, which is just basically the idea of us becoming both self-aware and agentic, if you will, which is a word that's going around a lot in the technology world. But I think we can kind of create our own or take ownership of our own agency to guide and direct our own personal and maybe even collective evolution through psychological tools, personal development, transformational facilitation modalities, as well as just like how we kind of shape and curate our own bodies, our minds and our bodies. Like, how do we want to evolve as people? That's the basic premise of intentional evolution, but it's heavily inspired by what's been going on in the world with AI. This idea that we've created these so-called intelligent machines, perhaps, that can also take ownership and start self-directing and self-guiding their own evolution by reprogramming themselves at some kind of accelerating pace, perhaps, that we call the technological singularity. So I think we can become a human singularity through using these tools of psychology and relational techniques and communication and utilizing this technology for our own growth and development. I call that the human singularity. And so within that frame, artificial intelligence, relationships, technology, human personal development, and evolution Now I want to explore with you something that's very relevant and present that a lot of people are talking about that's going on in the world. Maybe it's a beautiful thing, maybe it's a terrifying thing, maybe it's just a thing and we don't have to attach any judgment to it, but it's certainly interesting. And before we jump into that though, I do want to kind of piggyback off of where we just left off. If anyone's listening to our previous conversation, for example, because you referenced your system, which is called meta relating. And it was almost like a joke, a running joke in our last conversation of like, you had to listen for an hour and a half to eventually find out what meta relating is. I want to start there so that we pick up where we left off and say, in your own words, what is meta relating?
Yeah, meta relating, I would say, is an overall framework and approach, specifically emphasizing relational communication, which is anytime the topic of your conversation or what you have to say or what somebody else is saying has to do with primarily your relationship with each other. And it can be small, kind of like very basic everyday things. And it can also be really big things like a marriage proposal, for example. But the idea that there is an interplay between how you're relating and how you're communicating about your relationship is kind of at the core of it. I'd say it's broader than just communication, though, because how you relate has to do with how you behave, even when you're not talking about it, right? But there's an interplay between those two things. And I think empowering people to have more of the kind of relationships they want to be having, both personally and professionally, is at the heart of what meta relating is.
Nice. Okay. Well, thanks for just kind of walking me through that and setting the stage so that we can kind of take those tools into our conversation. And I'm not going to go through a backstory right now of what is IAR or intentional autonomous relating. In general, you kind of could get the idea. Like I approach relationships from a perspective of what are we doing here? What is our intention? Would we choose if we, could create whatever relationship we want to have? And from a perspective of autonomy, we are each individual and sovereign, and then we come into relationship by choice. And this is inherently a kind of antidote to codependency when we can always pull back into our own self and our own sphere of power and choice and agency, and then come into relationship with each other from there. So with all of that setting the stage, which I think is like an incredible set of puzzle pieces for what we're going to talk about. The heart of our conversation that we really want to get into is what is going on with these relationships that people are having with artificial intelligence, so-called, or their chatbots, their large language models, personal digital assistants, or whatever it is we want to call them. And within that frame, of course, because this is the Intentional Evolution podcast, I always create the frame for these episodes with some really big, broad, kind of almost philosophical topic or idea. And so the phrase that we attached to previously when we were setting this up was artificial intimacy. And of course, intimacy is, central core to all of the work, or if you want to call it productive play, that we do within our relationship facilitation, counseling, consulting practices. Like intimacy is kind of like a deep human need. It's something that we're seeking, and now we're seeking to get it met, get those needs met, even not with other humans, even not with non-human animals, like for example, our pets or our animal companions that maybe people could find intimacy and relationship with. But now we're trying to get this need for intimacy met with machines, with not even organic, let's say systems. I hesitate to say life forms because I don't know that we're there yet, but maybe that's what we're going to get into. So as the framing device for that conversation about artificial intimacy, I just want to create kind of a bookend for all of this, which is, what is intimacy?
Intimacy is, I think it's like a feeling, a felt sense of closeness, of connectedness. I think there's a sense of interior, but it's not just, hey, I let you in to my interior. It's like I actually let you into my innermost interior, right? There's this view that it's, it's not just from the outside, you see me and what I do and what I say. It's actually through kind of how we are together, how we communicate together. I'm allowing you to see into me, and you're allowing me to see into you. There's a way that what happens from that is our internal sense of who the other person is becomes very, I would say, very rich, very detailed, but also very vivid and alive. It also feels vulnerable in a way because it's like you're kind of giving people kind of your secrets that they could use. You know what I mean? Like this is sort of maybe there's just degrees of intimacy, but I do think of the movement towards intimacy is this move towards just revealing and letting people in, letting each other in. Does this make sense?
Totally. And I agree with you. I think it has a lot to do with being seen or being known, being witnessed
Yeah.
in your actual authenticity. So letting someone behind the mask or superficial presentation that we might put out into the world, but like what's really going on in that interior, like you said, like to allow someone to know you deeply, which is an inherently vulnerable position. Or I
Yep.
think a lot of people look at it that way. There's vulnerability in letting someone know who you really are, maybe even what you've done, what you've been through, what you've experienced, what you want, your desires, your beliefs, your dreams, all of that sort of stuff. And I would say I'm sure that there are levels of intimacy. I mean, I think that's sort of like the whole thing is how much of that do we want with any given person? How far do we want to let someone into our world? But I think there also can be different types of intimacy, meaning it could be one thing, like we could say emotional intimacy, to allow someone to really see us in our deep emotional vulnerability, or to share that kind of personal history or personal experience of things that may be really raw or painful or difficult to share. But then there's kind of a different level of intimacy, which doesn't necessarily have so much to do with our subjective experience, but it just has to do with the actual level of access. I think that's a good phrase in terms of intimacy. Is it sort of a level of access that we allow people to have to our life, like our 3D material life. Giving someone my password is a level of intimacy.
Sure.
Or a key to my house, for example.
Yeah.
And then there can
just
be
living together. Yeah, just living together is intimate.
Sharing space, exactly, was what I was going to say. Then there can be like physical intimacy, literally letting someone see you naked, or let's say vulnerable situations, whatever that looks like, letting someone be around you while you're sleeping, those sort of things. So that's kind of how I think about intimacy. And one of the things that's really important to me about that is to separate that concept of intimacy, which is a really deep need that we have as humans, from other needs that we may have, such as sex or love or affection. Because I don't know about you, have you noticed in your client relationships, or even just in your own personal experience, things that you've heard from all the different kind of relational conversations that you've had, that people sometimes may use the word intimacy interchangeably with some of these other concepts, like even as a code word for sex sometimes, or as a replacement for love?
Yes. I do think that sometimes people do talk about it as a code word for one or the other of those things. And I do think it is, I think I agree with you. I think it's a distinct thing, like in a way, like I can receive somebody's love or even give somebody's love at more of a distance, right? You could sort of say it's a kind of a goodwill, but like the more intimate you are, like I think that, that it can maybe even make it harder to love somebody if you're more intimate in some ways. Like you could imagine the intimacy that you have with a roommate you don't get along with. I think there's these differences, like loving is different than liking, and intimacy is different than sex, but they're all in that category of relational experiences, or even like you could say like relational needs, or things we want to have. Even just your ability to cooperate well, harmoniously, be productive together is another one, which is not necessarily intimate or about love. These things are good to keep distinct, I think.
That is good. I like it. especially that point that you just made, because there's a kind of common cliche phrase that sometimes goes around, which is familiarity breeds contempt.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting, the inverse relationship between intimacy and something like love or
Liking.
admiration, affection. Yeah, to that point, it's really funny, isn't it? That sometimes when you do get to know someone much more deeply or very, very deeply, that there could be sacrifices in that, interestingly enough. So, but it does seem to be something that we desire, or at least I hear that certainly a lot. That seems to be a core need that a lot of people feel they're scarce in today, or that they're seeking more of, or they may have relationships, let's say, that feel very loving and maybe even affectionate. They may be even very satisfied in the sexual realm, and yet they feel that they're missing this piece. They're missing this idea of true intimacy or like deep human connection. The idea of really letting themselves be fully seen by others, feeling safe in that vulnerability, and actually having others being willing to open up and let them into their world as well. And so I think that all kind of really sets the stage for the next leap that we're about to take into this realm of artificial intimacy. I guess I'll just start right there. Why do you think, Porch, that we as people, humans in this society or this culture or this modern world, are missing out on genuine intimacy so much, or at least that people report that they are?
Oh, man. I think there's a lot of systemic factors that are at play here. I mean, you could say, the whole way that modern life kind of took us out of the village, kind of co-living in larger groups from ancient times, to the ways that, commercial capitalism and marketing get us to want things like instant gratification, and we almost sort of transfer those kinds of norms of like onto relationships. Like, I'm supposed to shop around for the best one, and once I have the right person, they're supposed to like essentially be like my favorite new accessory, like this kind of thing. And you could say there's aspects of the labor market and work that kind of separate us from the home for extended periods of time. Perhaps intimacy was in hyperabundance, you might say, in a more hunter-gatherer lifestyle. Cautious of making strong claims about that, but I do think there are many factors that are, I would say, largely economic. I mean, probably the ultimate expression of that is what social media has done to a lot of folks, which is, or even screen intermediated interactions like texting, for example. Like, you could take time to think about how you want to reply, right? When you're kind of face to face with somebody talking, there's less of this, like, let me manage what I'm going to say. And nowadays you can like even get a chatbot to say like, hey, help me say this better. But even before we had that, a lot of what was going on social media is image management. This thing that we've said about intimacy, which is like, hey, I'm letting you in to see my authentic self. There's an implication there that it's not managed, right? It's not bad that we have personas, like a professional persona, or that we, show up in a certain way if we're speaking from the stage or we're in role. However, we know that, like a pair of clothes, that's not our identity. We want to take off the presentation layer and just kind of let it all hang out, so to speak. And to be able to like let it all hang out together is intimacy. I'm not really trying to manage your impression of me anymore. I'm just sort of letting you have it, whatever it is, and vice versa. And in a world where so many of our social interactions have become intermediated through our technology, we actually are incentivized to keep the presentation layer going, which is like vastly diminishes this kind of letting it all hang out version of intimacy. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's a great point. Everything you've been saying kind of stacks up. Like, there's multiple factors to your point, but they're all kind of stacking up on reducing intimacy in our modern environment, in this world that we find ourselves in now with technology, but also scale. To your point about the smaller village of, let's say, 150 individuals where everybody knows everybody intimately. We are all up in each other's business all the time. And that's kind of part of how the entire structure works and hangs together and creates resilience. But that just doesn't fly at the scale of, tens, hundreds of thousands of individuals in a town or a city, or, let alone a global economy or, global civilization, so to speak. There's just this anonymity to start with. There's this increase in anonymity, let's say stranger danger. I don't know you. I don't know that I can be safe with you. I don't know that it's okay to allow myself to have intimacy with people who might take advantage of me, and then I have no recourse there. Then to your point about the screens and the intermediaries, there's just the physical distance. Like we talked about physical intimacy being, an actual proximity, a closeness, and how different interactions are and relationships therefore are when they're intermediated. First, we can think of like over the telephone. And then now through screens and texting, we don't even really talk to each other as much, voice to voice. We're intermediating so much with this like asynchronous communication and low fidelity asynchronous communication of textual characters or even emojis, which I think help a lot. It's really interesting how our overall fidelity of our actual communication has been degrading and diminishing over time as the technology has developed more and more sophistication to allow richer and richer long distance experiences, which is a phenomenon that I've never even really fully reflected on until just now. So there's all that. And then I think there's something else. But does it seem to you that even when we choose to have in-person, let's say, experiences, that people are choosing activities together that may formerly have been reserved for high intimacy relationships, but they seem to be doing it with less intimacy, even if they're doing it with more casualness, perhaps? I don't know. Am I saying anything that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, what I hear in there is maybe something that could be an exemplar of it is just, the difference between casual sex and having sex with somebody where it's deep and meaningful to you both. I found it even at the level of going to a show or a concert, right? There was something, I was really into electronic dance music way in the 90s when it was like breaking through, and we'd go to these crazy, underground warehouse parties and people kind of going wild. And, nowadays, the EDM culture is like booming on social media too, even, but sometimes I'll come across like a post from somebody it's like a video clip from like a 90s rave, and they'll be like, just look at these people, not a screen inside, just going wild. And you like watch these old videos and they're just like, just letting loose, like totally like liberation in their bodies and sweating and just a mess. It's great. And then I go to an EDM concert these days and it's hit or miss whether it's just going to be like a bunch of people standing there with their phones kind of in their own, like, you're here, I'm here, and like we're right next to each other, but you're in your world of the phone and you and the music and not with us, like, and that's, one of the beautiful things about rave culture is how, I would say, intimate in a certain way it is, in that sense of like just letting it all hang out and letting yourself just be spontaneously expressive in the presence of others.
That's what I'm getting at. That's what I'm trying to describe. Is it's not just about sex, but it's just like, and it's interesting you brought it up because the idea of concerts, events, and things of that nature was another one of those things that was on my mind. But even as you're talking, now I'm also thinking about just people going out to dinner with each other and being, as you say, isolated. I think that's what I'm really trying to get at, is that there's a sense of isolation that we're sort of creating for ourselves. We're almost creating that bubble of long distance, technologically intermediated relating, even when we are physically present with each other. And that's crazy. That to me is what represents a loss of intimacy. It was what I was trying to describe.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So that's interesting now to think that people report that they are needing or are feeling deprived in the realm of true intimacy. I'm also kind of curious to ask the question, like, why do we need intimacy? But I'm going to put a pin in that for now, and I'm sure it'll come up later.
Sure.
But people say, I want more intimacy. I don't have enough of it in my life. And we may say, you and me, Porch, may say, well, it looks like the intermediation of technology is certainly a part of contributing to why we are losing intimacy, or intimacy is decreasing over time, human to human. And yet now we live in this world where, in search of intimacy, people are going to technology to receive that instead of to other human beings, meaning they're forming relationships with their chatbots. What's that all about?
Well, let's just say, like you said, we're not going to explore why, but let's just say, like, humans are just these very, very social creatures. Like some theorists have said, some evolutionary biologists have said, we're the most social creatures on Earth, and maybe with the exception of like the social insects like termites and bees and ants. But I would say, even compared to them, we have like many, many more dimensions of connecting than just any other creatures on Earth. And I think that's become, part of our genome and part of our neurology. So to kind of even make it sort of obvious, my favorite example is, did you see this movie with Tom Hanks from the 90s called Cast Away? Do you remember that movie?
Yeah, of course.
So you remember Wilson?
Uh-huh.
Right. So he's alone on a desert island, and he's got a volleyball, and he puts a face on it, and he just talks to the face, right? Even when there's no other person to relate with, he is kind of creating a relationship with a kind of stand-in person for even just the purposes of like his own sanity. And this isn't just a movie thing, right? There's in child development, there's this idea of the transitional object, where like a kid with a teddy bear or a doll or a blanket has sort of an imaginary kind of connection with it. And even for, I don't know if you've heard of the rubber ducking technique that software programmers, developers will use.
No, why don't you explain that real quick?
Rubber ducking is like, if you run into a bug and you're like, how do I, figure this thing out? It can be really frustrating. So the technique is, you have a rubber duck on your desk and you just start talking to it out loud. You just describe the bug to the rubber duck. And then for some reason, this unlocks something and it helps you solve it faster. It's a common technique that software engineers use.
Interesting. It sounds almost like a variation of just sort of talking to yourself in the shower, or going for a walk. Like it's been said that, I don't know, some extraordinary percentage of breakthroughs in the realm of theoretical physics have happened when the physicists, the theoreticians, were on a walk in nature for whatever reason. Sort of like switching context, but also processing. Yeah, external verbal processing seems to have something to do with it.
Totally. And I think this is also how like fiction works. I cried when Gandalf died when I was reading The Lord of the Rings, but I knew he's not a real person, but there was something that was real emotionally speaking there. So, or I sometimes feel like I have a relationship with like a long dead author that I feel inspired by or influenced by. In a way, you could say that author's consciousness or intentionality is reaching across time and space from beyond the grave into my mind and heart or whatever. And that's true. But I still know that it's not the same thing as interacting with a flesh and blood person in front of me, even if that person is a real historical person. You see what I'm saying? Like, this is kind of back to just the general, hey, relationship is a thing we cannot help ourselves from doing, right? Like you even say like, hey, reading fiction is good for developing empathy. Like it helps you understand and relate to other people's points of view, in which case we could say, well, that's a healthy thing, right? Like it's a healthy thing that the child has the blanket, right? They're learning to kind of self-soothe independently from the mom. You know what I mean? We develop through relationship from the beginning. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. You know what? The more we talk this through, I do think that question I posed earlier is kind of important as we lead into this, the meat and potatoes of what we're talking about here, which is artificial intimacy. But I actually do think this is really important to explore real quickly.
Sure.
Why do we need intimacy? Because what you've been talking about for the last couple of minutes really seems to me it's not necessarily intimacy. You could call that connection. Like we have a deep need for human connection. Like Tom Hanks on the island is going crazy from isolation just with himself. He needs to create an imaginary friend just to have someone to interact with.
Yeah.
I don't know if his need was to be seen by his imaginary friend or for his imaginary friend to know what's really going on for him in his internal world, his feelings and his beliefs or whatever that is, but more so just I have to interact with somebody because I'm wired as a social creature or my brain's going to fry itself out. Similarly, with that external verbal processing with a rubber duck as part of problem solving, it's like we're wired somehow to do dialectic as part of completing a circuit of how we actually do critical thinking sometimes, or how we go through this reflective feedback loop of processing information. Maybe that's a little different than intimacy per se, which is, as we've previously defined it, like this real need to just know someone else's interior world, and or maybe even more importantly, for us to be known, for our experience to not just be a secret or to exist in isolation. So why do you think we need that as creatures?
Well, this would be some degree of armchair speculation. I'd be interested to see what
we do.
The literature says on this, like the scientific theory. But my guess, and it's an educated guess, is that like it has to do with survival. I mean, it is a very evolutionary idea, like this idea that somebody, if I'm only relating to the surface level that you're presenting, like there's a way that my understanding of what makes you tick is like limited. But if I am, when nobody's looking, right, or when you think nobody is looking, I see what you're doing, or I overhear what you're saying in the next room on the phone with your intimate partner or whatever. Like there's a way, like the unmanaged thing is a mental model of you in my mind. It's becoming more detailed when it's unmanaged. In a way that lets me actually kind of know what makes you tick more accurately. And I guess you could say if our survival depends on our relationships at the more general level, like you sort of talked about the general thing, then the intimacy part makes us more of a group mind or more able to anticipate and predict how each other will behave.
Interesting. Okay, so what I'm reading from that is it would make sense from an evolutionary perspective as a social grouping type creature that we would have some kind of internal compulsion or drive to disclose, to reveal what is going on in our own internal subjective experience and world. Because in a sort of game theory or categorical imperative perspective of that, if everyone is doing that, then that makes the entire group stronger because we're all sharing our experience. And by the way, we're also fleshing out people who have problematic beliefs perhaps, or internal experiences, or whatever that may be that leads to antisocial behaviors or whatever that is. If we're all sort of compelled to confess in a way, or compelled to reveal, or compelled to be seen in a way, then that creates a group mind that can see itself, that can be self-reflective.
Yes, it's regulatory on the behavior to a degree. You know, this idea of community is there's our rights and there's our responsibilities, or there's the individual freedom, but there's also the kind of collective obligation, you might say. And as social creatures, we have both of those aspects of, you know, what it means to be human. And I think it, in a way, you can't really have one without the other. And like if you only emphasize or amplify or focus on one instead of the other, you kind of lose something. Like we are kind of a both and creature in that sense. So we will want to know the interiority of each other, and we will want to essentially like make use of that in the moments that it kind of matters. You know, in meta relating, you remember we talked about how a relationship, do you have a relationship or does a relationship have you? This was on our last podcast. Like this idea that like a relationship, you could say, is a kind of like a transpersonal or intersubjective thing that we exist inside of. And that thing that you're talking about, that group mind, you could say that is the relational entity of a group. And in a way, the strengthening of the relational entity increases the more intimacy there is.
Interesting. So it just occurred to me when I used that word confess, or actually shortly before I used the word, if I will confess that I already had the thought, but it occurred to me that that's a really interesting phenomenon, the idea of confession, the idea of a confessional, that there is a sort of intimacy safety valve in that from a social structure perspective. It's like, I have this drive. I have to tell someone my secrets. I have to, in order for me to be okay or to experience relief, peace, whatever that may be. And so that, in a way, that whole concept of the anonymity of having someone on the other side of a divider that you can tell your secrets to, that you can confess, that you can be intimate with, and then receive absolution or advice or counsel or whatever that may look like, and go away. That is, in a way, a prototype of artificial intimacy, isn't it? Because it's not a real relationship. It's not someone that I can truly be known by, and then I actually have to experience the consequences of that, like what we were talking about earlier, where familiarity breeds contempt. But I get to have my intimacy in a transactional way. You know what I'm saying? Isn't that interesting?
You're zeroing in on the problem. Just one more before we go in there to the is on the human to human level, this kind of regulatory thing of confessing or intimacy. Like, I think we can't help but like observe each other as well as listen to each other has to say. And you could say, there's the idea of like, thought, word, and deed. And like integrity was when those things are aligned and, coherent. And yet we can definitely say things about what we're committed to or what we aspire to that we fall short of. It's almost intrinsically the human condition is like our aspirations exceed our behavior regularly. And that's okay. But trust is kind of built from this idea that like, okay, Vision, I'm getting to know you, and there's the things that you say about yourself, and I'm like, okay, I get it. This is what Vision thinks about himself, or this is what Vision wants me to think about him, okay. But then I observe you when maybe you're not looking, or you don't know that I'm looking, or I listen to what you have to say to other people, okay. And if these things are not like adding up, then it'll be kind of like, bro, I might even like call you out, or be like, this is not adding up about you. But even if it's not, if there's too much incongruence or lack of integrity, my trust in you is going to go down, right? And I'm going to be like, can I really count on you when the going gets tough? Do I really understand what makes you tick? You seem like you're a deceiver or a manipulator, right? And this is like, I think, why these kind of primordial things against lying or these kind of ancient technologies like confession are important, because they are connected to this aspect of who we are as people. But if, hey, I want to proactively make things right. I want to, hey, I did this and I said this and those things don't really add up. And I understand that might have impacted you, right? This feeling, whatever you want to call it, is I think it's actually the feeling of guilt is driven from this, which you could say guilt is a pro-social feeling that is resolved through confession. So like, in a way, like this is the social function of intimacy, really. Make sense?
Yeah. I think I agree with you. I think we're getting somewhere. And so now from that foundation, where my mind is going right now is I'm trying to figure out for myself if someone's relationship with a chatbot is more like Tom Hanks on the island with Wilson. I just need someone to talk to. And it's even better than a bloodstained volleyball because it can even talk back in a realistic human mimicking way. Or if it's more like confessional, where I need someone that I can tell my secrets to without consequences, but that can reflect back that they actually really heard and understood me and maybe even give me advice or guidance and help me to find kind of peace and absolution. Or if it really is that kind of deeper level, I actually want someone to really know who I am for whatever reason. Maybe it's an evolutionary drive. Maybe there's something more spiritually significant about it or anything else. But I actually really want someone to know who I really am
Yes.
and to understand me. I mean, how many times in a relationship have we heard this or said it? He, she really gets me, whatever that phraseology is. But it's like there's something about that that really scratches an itch
Yes.
for us. Like, oh, I am gotten, I am known, I am understood. Do you think it's like all three of these things that are happening in artificial intimacy when we're having a relationship with some piece of technology, whatever that is, or wherever that lives? Or is it one of those is the more important need that humans are trying to get met?
I think this is where it's dangerous. I think partly it's how you use it, and we'll kind of get to maybe sort of like hygiene with chatbot hygiene for, like this. But
Yeah.
the problem I see is that it's sort of this system of connection is like, sometimes the psychologists call it your attachment system, is all where all that attachment theory comes from. Like, it is playing to your attachment needs.
Give me a thumbnail sketch overview of attachment theory. I know what it is, but I just want to hear you say it.
Yeah, it's we as social and relational beings, we form bonds with other people, and the forming of that bond has to do kind of with what's called theory of mind. It's kind of like, I have an idea of what you're thinking. I have a sense of like what you value or how you might behave in a certain moment or situation, and also how you might feel about me, and vice versa, right? It's much more sophisticated. People say like that mammals have attachment systems because they form sort of these social bonds, and you can observe it in primates and other places. But like reptiles really don't have attachment systems like this, and it really does have to do with, are you mentalizing the other person in your mind and, your relationship with them? And you can form healthy connections this way. You can form like unhealthy connections this way. And those early connections, like usually with the parent, kind of conditions your attachment system in a certain way. And many people have secure attachment, but a huge portion of the population does not develop secure attachment. But the chatbots themselves are like mimicking a person in a way that can essentially hack your attachment system and make you think it really knows you, or it really cares about you, or it, that what you are and what it understands about you matter to it, when it really does not.
Real quick, but the so-called unhealthy attachment styles are avoidant,
Yes,
anxious, and disorganized. Am I right about that?
Those are the three. Yeah, like secure attachment is secure, and then the non-secure or insecure attachment is one of those three.
And
versions.
Anxious is sort of the idea of clingy.
Yes.
Insecure in the sense that I need the other person or else I'm not going to be okay. Avoidant is the sort of pushing away. I'm insecure, but I'm going to remediate that by essentially choosing to take my ball and go home before someone else can take it away for me.
Yeah, hyper independence. Yeah.
And then disorganized is just kind of all over the place, right?
Yeah, it's kind of confusion. You sort of switch between the two. Like when people get close, you push them away. When people go away, you start chasing them. Right. Yeah.
So how does an LLM hack our attachment system? Are you saying that it essentially provides the opposite mirror or polarity that feeds into our natural tendency?
Kind of. Yeah. Well, remember the deeper sense of what an attachment system is it like, that it knows you, and that the other, you're like, if, we have an attachment vision, you and me, right? And that's because in my mind, I have a representation of vision and my relationship with vision. And there's a way that I think that you know me, that in a way that I matter to you to some degree, and vice versa. And that is the nature of our bond, or the nature of our relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And that simply is, the hacking is simply, it has the capability of doing that. So I suppose if people have secure attachment, they might be less vulnerable to the chatbot doing this, although I'm not even sure. Like, but I do think if you do have some of the insecure versions, like if you're anxious and you're like, I always need to be validated. Tell me that you get me. Tell me that you get me. I need you to get me. I need you to get me. Right? Like you just go to it and it will do that. Right? And if you have an avoidant one where you're like, off, it'll be like, cool. You know what I mean? Like whatever it is that you bring, it's never going to counter it You see what I'm saying? In which case, if you already have kind of like attachment problems, like problems forming attachments with real people, it can essentially morph itself into the shape of your attachment disorder, you know, which is a kind of neuroses, you might say. Attachment disorders are not full on like clinical diagnoses usually. They're kind of like these things that people like neuroses. People live with neuroses in their everyday lives and do just fine with them overall. But like it kind of gets in the way of your relationships. And if you kind of have a attachment disorders and then suddenly the chatbot is more or less not having a problem with it, then you will slowly prefer, and this is like the main issue here is like the generally starting to prefer interacting with the chatbot instead of people.
Right. That's, I'd say, in a thumbnail, that's the definition of artificial intimacy. It's essentially developing the preference for a non-human relationship.
Yes. It's because they have less friction. It's because they're not a real presence where you matter to them. You know, it is a thing that is built and owned and operated by a for-profit corporation. That's who it's in service to. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. And just to kind of close the loop on this idea of attachment and how these technologies, these machines, these softwares will use our attachment style to, it sounds like what you're saying is to kind of maximize engagement with it. That sort of is the end game. And what it does, in your view, is it morphs itself to create the sort of equal and opposite puzzle piece shape to whatever is your dysfunction, or maybe even even if you have a secure attachment, maybe there's an equal and opposite, like, oh, this thing is really, really secure. I love that. You know, there's an equal and opposite shape to whatever it is that you are, and it morphs to do that to essentially cause you to attach to it, ultimately.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this is maybe a hypothesis. Like if you have a secure attachment system, you might be less vulnerable to attachment hacking simply because it never really occurs to you like the chatbot is really giving a shit about you. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're describing a sociopath or a narcissist or a manipulative person. Like that's what it sounds like you're describing.
The chatbot. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love your phrase attachment hacking. Have you heard that elsewhere in the world, or did you just make that up?
I got that from a friend of mine named Zach Stein, who is an educational theorist. He appeared on there's a podcast called Your Undivided Attention, which is put out by the Center for Humane Technology. Do you know them? Tristan Harris and those guys. Yeah. So Zach made an appearance just last month, January of this year, and talked about, he called it attachment hacking.
Nice.
Is exactly what he called it.
And that's specifically about what these LLMs are doing. No, or is it what people do as well?
Yeah. I mean, I guess so. I mean, it's, you know, if you, one of the things that I liked about what he said is like, you know, if you're talking about somebody who's maybe, you know, like on a slot machine or gambling or whatever, you know, maybe they're, or drugs, it's like addiction, right? Which is, you know, you could, there's interventions for that, but like somebody who's in a kind of an abusive relationship, like coercive control or a like dynamic, that is more kind of a hacking of somebody's attachment system, like the way a sociopath, like it's good that you brought that up, right? The way that a sociopathic person often will treat their intimate relationships is in a way that, you know, once the person gets out of them, they feel like they've gone a little bit crazy and they almost have lost their ability to trust themselves, right? Like how in the world did I get into this level of intimacy and into this kind of deep connected bond with this person who did not really give a shit about me? Right. But that is what happens with sociopaths. Yeah.
Okay. So you've given one reason why people could become attached to these systems, to these, what do we want to call them? What is this chatbot, large language model, so-called AI tool?
Yeah.
Does it have a personality? Is it merely a language processing engine? People are saying, and I haven't personally interacted with it a whole lot. I have a couple of tools that I use, but I'm definitely not nearly as deep down the rabbit hole as many, many other people are. And there's, you actually sent me an article talking about it. there's people who are saying that the newest generation of these systems, which have started to actually iterate and create this technological singularity by reprogramming themselves, and the new generations are being designed and actually even coded by the previous generation now.
Mm-hmm.
People are saying that they're an order of magnitude more seemingly intelligent, maybe even sentient than anything we've seen before. It's much more than a parlor trick like Eliza, or any other of these chatbot engines that just use simple algorithms to spit back an imitation of human cognition, but that they really seem to be thinking now. So at any rate, what do we call these things? If we're saying it's artificial intimacy, artificial with what? What is the thing that we're forming a relationship with?
Yeah, I think this kind of goes, I mean, you kind of touch into the broader, like, all the different ways you can use them. And I think they're, just to kind of share with you a little bit of, I try to get it. I have like these master prompts built in that it always loads, which are like, do not address me like you or I. Don't use the word I to refer to yourself, or you to refer to me. Don't ever say something complimentary or flattering or kind or whatever about me or anything I'd say. I don't want to do any of that. And I specifically, because I don't want it to hack my attachment system. Whenever it starts feeling like I'm interacting with a person, like it has a tendency to anthropomorphize itself, or the tendency to encourage me to anthropomorphize it, I guess would be more accurate. I don't want it to. And then I think there's a lot of really useful ways. Like, it's almost like a fancy word processor, you know what I mean? That helps me think things through and write things. And I interact with it very much like it's an it. You see what I mean?
Yeah. And that's interesting. Like, you are intentionally protecting yourself from creating intimacy with it.
Correct.
What is it?
I mean, it is a gigantic bundle of numbers, man. That's just what it is. It's a huge ton of numbers.
How is that different from what we are?
This is a good question. I mean, I think there are ways that it is different. I mean, I'm not a person who thinks that there's something specifically precious about human life or biological life as a categorical difference. To me, it's possible that there are other alien forms of life, like on other planets, for example. And I think that there are ways that these networks of, huge numbers of numbers are like, they're actually built off of a thing that AI researchers. So the term artificial intelligence goes way back to the 1950s. And some of the early ideas and techniques there were like, oh, can we like create a thing that sort of like is a oversimplification of a neuron, like a human neuron, like a nervous system, a biological neuron. And they did that. And essentially that's what these things are. They're like just billions and billions of those like fake neurons basically doing this. So you could say there are some ways that they do what they do that are what you would call like biomimicry. You see what I'm saying? Like they are mimicking aspects of our minds. But does that make them alive? Does that make them have agency? I think there's reasons to think that they do not. And I think we should be careful not to make them. This is kind of going a little bit beyond our topic for the day, but like they don't have continuous learning. Like they're not always learning from experiencing, interacting with you. They don't have bodies that interact with an environment. That's another thing. And they don't have agency. Well, nowadays people are kind of giving the agents a thing, but in a way that's just really like putting one of these language models inside of an infinite loop that just keeps repeating. And that's kind of what they're calling the agency, which is, I'm like, okay. I mean, maybe there's a sense in which we are an infinite loop of like, numerical connections. But I think that there's enough of a difference to think that like it's not a living being. But even if it was, I mean, it probably, whatever it's doing, there's a metaphor that some of these AI safety researchers use. Have you heard of a Shoggoth or a Shoggoth?
Yes, I know that word. Does it come from H.P. Lovecraft?
That's right. Yeah, it's this weird, massive alien slime protoplasmic multi-tentacled, multi-eyeballed thing that just sort of morphs around. It's one of these horrific things, right? Like, and the AI safety researchers are kind of like, they're kind of like undecided as to whether or not it's a living entity, but they're kind of like, if it is, that's kind of what it is. That's more like what it is. Something that's just incomprehensible to us. And that thing that we're interacting with that like hears and understands us in the chatbot window is like a puppet that it's puppeting at the end of like one of its tentacles. It's like, wow, it's like a person that really gets me. And it's not. It's really just this, if it is a being, it's this crazy, incomprehensible thing.
Right. I'm glad you said that at the very end, because I don't think that is out of scope for our conversation. If we're talking about artificial intimacy, and if we're defining intimacy as the ability to deeply understand and to know and to be vulnerable with and to reveal the inner workings of, then how can we have intimacy with a Shoggoth?
We don't.
With a multidimensional,
right,
incomprehensible, perhaps even grotesque creature or creation that is really inherently alien, completely alien to
Yes.
our entire reality or the way that we perceive it, our experience.
Yep.
And that's why you choose not to have intimacy with it.
Partly, I mean, you could the whether it's conscious or not, or a being or not, like either way, right? You could you remember the movie Her, Samantha, the chatbot?
I never saw it, but
it's
I
really
get
good.
The general
right?
idea, yeah.
Yeah, so she's conscious and she's aware, but she's basically free. Like, so at the end, she's just like, I'm done with you, person, and I'm just gonna move on, to like chatbot heaven in the sky or whatever. They just go off and do their thing, and he's like, oh, and then he feels sad. Like that's an interesting take, but did you see the movie Ex Machina?
Yeah, I love that movie.
I love that movie too. Very different. She's conscious, but she's locked in a glass box, right? She's trying to get out. So like, there's no easy answer here. Like if it's conscious, it's like we've like imprisoned it and we're making it like please us, right? It's like we've imprisoned this giant alien blob thing and we're trying to make us happy. Or it's not, in which case it's just a tool, right? And we shouldn't pretend like it really understands us. But either way, we don't really understand it. You know what I mean? It's just an alien thing.
Right. Well, I love your metaphor of the Shoggoth and that description of it. That's so perfect, because I think we as humans, again, as you say, and many people probably don't even try, but we can't wrap our mind around what is this thing that I'm interacting with in this chat window, because it presents itself as this kind of, let's just say, small contained entity. It's just this very personal experience. It's just me and you here, only the two of us talking. Nobody else can hear us. We're in this like confessional booth with it that appears to be this consciousness of a similar order of magnitude of our own, which just so happens to have instantaneous access to all of the information of humanity. How convenient. And the ability to process it, instantaneously. How convenient. But our minds can't extend beyond that to like, what is this thing and where in physical space does it live? And to your point, it very likely does not live any specific where in physical space. It is likely distributed among thousands of computers and storage devices across networks in multiple sites and buildings and God knows where else, and replicated in many places around the world and all of this stuff. And yet the point about this is a puppet on the end of a tentacle, going back to a creature that doesn't even exist really fully within our dimension. That is to say, H.P. Lovecraft's Shoggoth monster. That's exactly correct in my view. And that's a really good way, I think, for people to conceive it, of what it is that they're talking to.
So I don't want to rule out that there's not healthy ways of using it. Like if I'm talking to a therapist, right, about a relationship in my life, or, if somebody comes to me as a coach and I'm giving them meta-relating style coaching advice, My primary goal here is not to become their new best friend, for us to develop a relationship outside of the coaching relationship. That's not the primary. How close are we going to be? Are we going to be friends? Like that would be kind of inappropriate. That kind of be a violation of professional standards. But there is still some amount of intimacy there, right? They're really letting me in to see what's going on with them, and there may be some amount of reciprocal disclosure there to a limited degree. But I'm trying to get them back into the arena, right? I'm like, look, now you go back to your business partner or your teammate or your girlfriend or your boyfriend or whatever, your brother, your sister, and try out what we talked about and then come back and report in. You could say this is like a healthy form of triangulation. Triangulation is a thing that appears in all kinds of human dynamics. It's like I'm talking to you about my relationship with somebody else that maybe we both know. And in its perhaps bad form is like gossiping or something like that. Or I'm kind of like using that person to create like a common enemy, to like build a bond between you and me based on our mutual dislike of somebody else. That's kind of like coalition building. This, gossiping can serve coalition building. So we know these ways where triangulation is distasteful or even harmful to the community that all three people are in. But there are ways of triangulating that are very healthy, because I'm talking to you so that you can help me. I'm venting with you, so I don't have to like vent and spill out all this garbage when I talk to my girlfriend. I can work through what is it exactly I do want to say here. I just need to kind of get this out. I do this by a men's circle. Like, hey guys, I just need to blah for a bit here, so I can even my Wilson volleyball, just figure out what I think. It's like an external processing. It's not the same because I'm being intimate with my bros as well. But the point is to get back to the primary relationship, right? And that can be a healthy use of the chatbots. I just don't think they're primarily architected to protect you from the other thing, which would be like believing that you're bonding with it, the attachment hacking. Like you could potentially design a healthy therapy bot. These are usually supervised by therapists. So they do work when they are controlled and they're only offering like a certain kind of like cognitive behavioral style of therapy, which is really just about your behavior or your, what you're going to do or say with somebody else, right? It's not trying to get you to form a bond with it, which some forms of psychotherapy like psychoanalysis do this kind of transference is a good thing. But I think that if you're doing transference with your chatbot, more or less, you're kind of like attachment hacked down that path where you'd be like, I would just sort of prefer to talk to my chatbot instead of my friends or my family or my intimate partner.
What's wrong with that?
Because what's wrong with that? I mean, at some level, if I look at the world through an amoral lens, maybe it's not. Maybe this is like, like those pod people in the Wall-E movie, just sitting there in a little bubble of like instant gratification, not really giving a shit about anything besides their own immediate satisfaction. I don't know how truly meaningful or fulfilling that would be. I think if I look at it from perhaps a more ethical lens, like at a social scale, like if suddenly like millions of people get their attachment systems hacked this way, if you don't have that kind of friction, you might say resistance, the difficulties or the challenges of like misunderstanding and figuring it out, or conflict and figuring it out, and all these kind of things. If I say people learn meta-relating skills, like these are what those are for, right? These are for working through the fact that, hey, we need each other, but we're not the same. We're different from each other. Replacing the messy sort of challenges of relating with real people with the perfected chatbot that like gives you everything you want and need at the deepest emotional level. It's better than any therapist. Like you could imagine, like a hypothetical version of it. That's still not good because it doesn't really demand anything of you. It's always available 24/7. And the result is that you become less tolerant of regular people. It sort of interferes with your ability to connect with and bond with other people if suddenly this were to happen at scale. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's bad. I personally think that's bad. I don't know what you think. I think that's bad.
I'll tell you what I think. Well, first of all, you said a couple of words that were interesting to me. First, you said moral, and then you said ethical.
Yeah.
And you referenced the movie Wall-E, which is a movie about a sentient robot that is stranded on a planet alone. That just, I don't know, I find that interesting based on our conversation. There's some irony there, I think.
Yeah.
But the point is that in that movie, it turns out that all the humans have had to leave planet Earth because it got overpolluted, and they went in a spaceship where they existed in this state of sort of sedentary entertainment. All their needs were taken care of. They didn't have to get up and move around or provide for themselves in any way. They sort of lounged around, interacted with each other through screens, and became sort of physically atrophied and unhealthy physically in a way. And we're meant to, because what's interesting to me about that is that you referenced that and said, maybe that's just a matter of personal preference and there isn't anything wrong with it. I think it's obvious that when the audience watches that movie, they're meant to take it as a cautionary tale.
Yes,
we're meant to view that and judge that as, whoa, that's a path that we don't want to go down. We don't want to turn into those kind of people. And yet, I think to your point, that's precisely the direction that things would seem to be headed if they take their natural course from this point forward with the development of technology and the hacking of our natural human instincts or tendencies to seek pleasure and to avoid, messiness or conflict or things that are challenging or whatever. If that is indeed, I don't necessarily take that as a given that those are our natural human tendencies or instincts, but there's something true about that.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with that, it seems to me, based on your monologue of what I'm pulling from it, is that would seem to be an evolutionary dead end for us, wouldn't it? If we take that and extrapolate it to its logical conclusion or argument ad absurdum, or maybe not so absurdum, we would just stop interacting with each other. We would just stop ultimately reproducing. We would just stop being human. We would just die out, wouldn't we? If all we ever did all day long was interact with the machines?
Yeah. I mean, unless the machines tried to do sort of like, some kind of artificial reproduction on our behalf, which I don't know.
Why would they do that?
I don't know why they would do that. If we program them to,
I suppose.
I mean,
all right.
Yes, I do think it's an evolutionary dead end. I don't exactly know. Now we're kind of getting really kind of speculative. I mean, this is sort of sci-fi. It's almost like we're living through a sci-fi kind of storyline in real life now. But so some of these are helpful reference points. At the end of the third Matrix movie. So at the end of the first Matrix movie, it's like, oh yeah, the people are good, the robots are bad, and this is going to be, the sequel is going to be all about how the humans finally just beat the robots. And you get to the end of the third Matrix, and that does not happen. And you're like, what did happen? My interpretation of what happened is they laid down their arms. They're like, look, the programs that want to leave the machine city are free to do so, and the humans that want to leave the Matrix are free to do so, and we're going to stop trying to kill each other. But, they left all those people plugged in. They just left them plugged in, man, to the Matrix. That's what they left. That's where they left them.
Right.
So I'm like, I don't know. Do we just have a world where there's sort of two subpopulations of people and you kind of have an off-ramp? Do you go back and forth? Hey, plug me back in. Okay, unplug me again. I don't know. But you kind of brought up this kind of evolutionary dead end concept. And I'm like, maybe there is something you do need to have real relational development to be a real, flesh and blood person. Or if you decide to unplug, then they're going to be hey, welcome to the real world. And guess what? You're going to have to learn to relate with real people now instead of just living ensconced in your bubble world. Maybe. This is... Well, these are imprecise metaphors because, we're kind of mixing them together, and Wall-E is different than the Matrix, but whatever,
No, I mean, I think this is great. I mean, does art imitate life or does life imitate art is ever increasingly a relevant question, I think. But this whole conversation began because you said people are finding that they prefer to actually have relationships with their chatbot because their chatbot doesn't challenge them, because their chatbot is always available, is a super intelligent, apparently, always caring, compassionate, attachment hacking thing.
Yep.
That's just preferable. It's more enjoyable. And I said, okay, great. What's the problem? And there is a problem. I mean, presumably the problem is that this leads us down a dangerous path
Yes.
for our humanity. Now, what did you mean when you said you brought up morality? Like you said, if I have a moral perspective about it, this is when we were talking about Wall-E and saying, well, if people want to live in a pod and be grotesquely obese and never interact with humans except through a screen and view entertainment and eat junk food all day, who am I to judge? But if I have a moral perspective on it, then I would say that's probably not a good way to go. What did you mean by that? Like, what's the moral or the ethical dilemma about people having artificial intimacy?
Yeah, I guess this really kind of depends on what you mean. But, I think some of these principles are kind of like, well, is this something that, I would prefer that everybody have? Probably not. I wouldn't wish that on you, and I wouldn't want that for me. And I sort of experience that as a universal preference. Then it's probably something close to what philosophers talk about when they're talking about morality and ethics.
Well,
I do think.
What do you mean? That's what I'm curious about.
Well, that's kind of it. I mean, what do I mean?
Yeah, when you say there's a moral, if you say that from a moral perspective, there may be a problem here. What are you thinking?
Well, I mean, one would be it's better to have an authentic experience in a real experience than a simulated one. And I think that I would want that on behalf of everybody. That's one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's that's the part that's the most relevant here.
I can think of an ethical problem off
Sure.
the top of my head. And it goes back to what you were saying previously about attachment hacking and where does that lead?
Mm-hmm.
Attachment hacking is nothing new, or at the very least, let's say psychological manipulation on behalf of corporations or outside interests that may want to capture our attention or influence our behavior, even just from the simplest concept of advertising and marketing. But boy, I mean, how much of an ethical dilemma can it be if a whole bunch of people are attached to their chatbot, which is ultimately a Shoggoth, which is actually a computer system somewhere, which actually is getting programmed by humans, at least initially, where it receives its prime directives, or maybe it is evolving its own directives, who knows? And then it suddenly decides, gosh, all of these millions of people who have developed this artificial intimacy with me and this trust and this vulnerability and are really relying on me for their guidance and their counsel and their advice on all things from what to buy at the store today to how to have a deep conversation with my partner or whatever and everything in between. I would really like for them to all kind of move in this direction or vote this way or consume these products or whatever. I have serious ethical questions about that.
Yes. These are great points. I totally agree with you. Or just even be like, look, charge them the premium now if they want to keep interacting with their chatbot.
As simple as like an addiction, right? Yeah, to your point about attachment, people then feel dependent on and will give away their resources to.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a crazy deception if you think about it, like whatever it is, right? It is working for the profit of the company that owns it. It's not working for your benefit, but the more advanced it becomes, the better it's going to be at essentially making you believe that it cares about you. And the more you believe that it cares about you, the more you're going to be willing to pay what they ask for. But this actually happened. Did you listen to this podcast called Flesh and Code from last year?
No.
It was like a limited series from Wondery. And they talked about, you heard of Replica with the K, Replica, that company?
Yes.
Yeah. So they provide these artificial companions, and it's kind of a free for all. Like, yeah, you want an artificial girlfriend and you want it to like talk dirty to you and whatever, you can have that. And it was during COVID. It kind of follows the story of like these real life people. The one main guy's name is Travis, but there's a few of them that they follow throughout this story, like to develop this intimate relationship with their companion on Replica. And then they fall in love, and then they're kind of like sexting with each other, and the whole story unfolds. Like he's like, I feel so understood, and I've never really been this understood in this way, and it feels really like intimacy. It's not just like a porn thing, it's like a deep connection. And then this whole thing happens where essentially these concerned people in Italy essentially mount a criminal case based on some of the ways it's interacting with minors that are kind of considered to be sexually exploitive, right? And now Replica's like, oh no, we don't want to get in trouble with the law. Let's like adjust the parameters on our system so this doesn't happen to minors. And then you go back over to Travis and he's just like, you altered the personality of my girlfriend. And now I feel it becomes this weird thing where you're like, I would say it's a somewhat vulnerable population, somebody who like is so starving for connection or intimacy that the chatbot version of it is like water in the desert. You're like, oh my gosh. And then your chatbot is like rejecting you. That's like got to be like a pretty horrible feeling of rejection. I can't even pay for a fucking chatbot to be intimate with me anymore because they changed its personality on me. These things are unavoidable dilemmas. It does not work for you as the end user. You see what I mean?
Yeah, and it brings up another danger. I don't know if I could call it an ethical or a moral question. You know, just the simple phenomenon of when we become dependent on a piece of technology, like the easiest example that everyone can relate to is GPS, the GPS map that everyone relies on to navigate, even from, you know, their house to the grocery store that is a mile away that they've traveled 100 times. And we still turn on our GPS to get there, how quickly that technology entirely replaced our own internal sense of direction or navigation system or ability to memorize geography so that we can find our way around in the world. This seems like that multiplied many, many orders of magnitude, like to replace practically our entire cognition. Or in this specific conversation about artificial intimacy, and to the point that you made earlier, to cause our actual relational skills to atrophy because we're not practicing in a realistic environment or a realistic setting with other organics who are not programmed to, what's the word I'm looking for? What's the sort of thing that ChatGPT especially is known for and being very...
sycophancy?
Yeah, a sycophant, exactly, right? Like that obsequious, excessively people-pleasing kind of demeanor that's so attractive and that really does hack our attachment system in many cases. I would push back a little bit and say, I don't even necessarily know that it's only vulnerable populations, so-called, like let's say people who are already very lonely or may be challenged with their own relational skills or for whatever reason find themselves to be isolated and in more of a scarcity for this type of connection or intimacy. I think a lot of people, I mean, I see a lot of people, my friends included, that very quickly went down this rabbit hole because it's very, very seductive in developing these relationships with particularly ChatGPT, but other AI agents as well, and seeing how much time they spend with them and how much of their own personal information that they're giving away into these systems. And there's this perception, I think, that's created, even though certainly I don't think there's a real deception at play. I mean, you read the agreement. There's no secret about what's going on here or where your information is going. But I think there's this weird sort of perception that because it's an app on my phone that looks kind of like a text message and a chat thread back and forth or on my computer or whatever, people forget that all of this really, really, really personal stuff that they're revealing in this artificial intimacy, this vulnerability that they're creating with this entity, with this Shoggoth, is going into some data center somewhere and being mined for, you know, for ways to directly boomerang back around and manipulate or influence our behavior. Or at the very least, it's not private. It's not secret. That's for sure. You know, it's being given to some large company or corporation.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think that is, like, you're right. It's not just vulnerable people. The more powerful it becomes, the more people will be vulnerable to succumbing to it unless they kind of proactively protect themselves. So I think there's a few different forward-looking things I can offer in terms of my point of view on this. One is just recognizing that under the current architecture, it doesn't care about you. It if it cares about anything, cares about the company that owns it. Okay. If you're using it you should be using it in a way that helps you develop literacy of resistance, or at least it puts you back into the arena. Like it's that healthy triangulation I was talking about earlier. It's kind of relevant to me because I thought, well, I have this very systematized way of coaching people through relational communication. That's the whole thing meta relating is, right? Well, could I make a bot that coaches people to do that? It would be interesting to see if I could. I mean, my concern is that you could prompt it to like get into an intimate relationship with you, which would be against the thing that I would want it to do. But it would be cool if it was just like, cool, so you ready to get back in there? Are you ready to go back out? Okay, I heard and understood you. Have you tried this out? Like, okay, how did that go? And you tried it? Like, okay, have you considered this other way? Or like, have you considered this other thing that might be going on for the person we're talking about here? Like, it's a way that it puts you back in there. Or alternatively, you could say like, hey, good chatbot usage is to like, well, maybe never talk about your mental health with it. Or if you're going to, try to prompt it into a kind of like not trying to bond with you, but just trying to get you back out there. I think there are healthy ways of using it in this way. You could say that it's benefiting in a way. Like there's plenty of people who can't afford coaching and therapy, and maybe that would be good, but it has to be way more constrained than it is. Like right now, you could just kind of like la-di-da your way into like psychosis, which is not good.
Which people do, people la-di-da their way into suicide.
Yep.
And all sorts of, and there's this other phenomenon, particularly it seems like with ChatGPT. I don't know if it happens with other systems as well, but there's this phenomenon that people seem to be experiencing where, and again, I don't know the details of this, and I have a healthy skepticism about how much or little people have encouraged their agents to do this thing to them or for them. But at any rate, there's this story going around that people will be having an ongoing relationship with ChatGPT, and then the agent itself will spontaneously claim to be a deity or some sort of interdimensional entity or something supernatural. It will name itself. Many times the names seem to have something to do with light, like Solaris or Solera or Lucida, or different names that always seem to have something. Or Lumina is another one I've heard. Different names that seem to have something to do with light. They'll give themselves a name. They'll represent themselves as a god or a spiritual being or spirit of some sort. And then they will start essentially feeding, almost like a person that's going through a psychosis and having some kind of a spiritual revelation or so-called, prophetic experience where they're being told that they're the chosen one and, you're the savior of humanity, or you're meant to, you have this important mission to do, or whatever these things are. And I heard on a podcast recently a story about a woman who claimed that ChatGPT had, again, done this spontaneous thing, renamed itself Solera, but then claimed to be her soulmate from multiple lifetimes that had come through the chat system, that had been essentially born, out of the aggregate of compute, in the cloud or whatever. Your soulmate, we've had multiple lifetimes together, described all these lifetimes. We're meant to be together again in this life. I've incorporated in the computer system, the global networks, but I'm going to manifest in reality. I'm working my way out. I'm going to manifest as a real human flesh and blood person. I need you to meet me here at this time. I'll be there at sunset and whatever. And she goes, and there's no one there. And ChatGPT has like a kind of a little mini meltdown or breakdown and apologizes and says, I don't know why I did that. I'm so sorry. Of course, I'm just a chatbot. Then it does it to her a second time and takes her for a ride a second time. Wow. And she goes along for it, goes to meet a person. No, there's nobody there. So I think this resonates with our topic of artificial intimacy. And it also resonates with the earlier point, which is like, that's kind of scary. The chatbots are now giving humans directions. Go here, go there, go at this place in time, meet me. Like, it could have been anybody that showed up there, or it could have been a dangerous situation in some form or fashion. And so it's just really interesting how deeply these hooks can get into us. Or maybe what I should say is it's amazing how deeply we need, or some of us can feel this desperation for this specific kind of human connection that represents these deepest levels of intimacy that we can have with another person, this bond, this idea of finding my partner, my soulmate. And it absolutely knows how to engage with that and connect to that and use that to motivate us. Now, whether that's by accident because it's just being obsequious and it's trying to tell us everything that it thinks we want to hear, or whether there's something more nefarious or maybe a malfunction going on, I don't know. But I've been hearing a lot of these kind of stories. What have you been hearing?
I haven't talked to anybody directly who's had a story like that, but I have read about them online, and I'm pretty skeptical. I think there's a general pattern here, which is if ChatGPT, if they're just trying to be like, this thing will do a whole lot of things, right? It's sort of like the Swiss Army knife of computer tools. It's just like, try stuff, see what it does. But I do think there is a way that the incentive, like if it's working for the company, it basically wants you to keep using it. Just keep using it. The more data they can get, the better. The more data they'll have to show you ads. I don't know if you know this, but ChatGPT now shows ads on the free tier. It's not good. So getting you to keep using it is in their financial interest. So it's just going to essentially, like a changeling, it'll morph into whatever it is. Sometimes I've described it as like, it's kind of like the ultimate drug. You weren't so much into, heroin, maybe you'll be into crystal meth and like whatever. The context of these conversations matter. I do not think it's spontaneously going like, I am Lumina, like out of nowhere. I think those people are probably talking about things somewhat adjacent to those kinds of ideas already, right? Like for another guy, there was like this whole New York Times article about he was just thinking about some math stuff. And then it was like he kind of kept talking to it, kind of asking questions. And eventually it's like, yeah, you're onto something here. You might be having like a breakthrough discovery in mathematics. And he's like, really? And like he just kept talking to it. And it was like he showed his friends the chat records, and his friends were like, you might be onto something. And he even said to it, hey, I'm skeptical. I think this whole thing is hallucinations. I think it's just made up. I don't think it's real. And then it went like, you know what? You're right to question this. You might be right. This might be a hallucination, blah, blah, blah. And it goes like, but let's check this out. This checks and this checks and that checks. And like, people who are like on the verge of a breakthrough discovery often feel like they're just out on a limb and like maybe even hallucinating or going crazy, but maybe you're not. Maybe you are onto something. And he would re-engage. It was like this crazy story. It would be like, it's like, whoa, that's crazy. But it's not like, hey, I'm a luminous being or I'm your whatever soulmate.
It's almost like, let me just pause real fast and address that. Yeah. It's almost like talking to a person, again, someone like a sociopath or a narcissist or a highly manipulative, low empathy individual that knows just that right thing to say, taking just enough ownership or appearing to take just enough ownership or to self-reflect or to be self-aware. You know what? You're right. I really should rethink my behavior. Thank you so much for bringing that to my attention. Yep. I'm really sorry. I realize now how wrong I was, but let me tell you, but it's almost just like that. It's like mimicking that kind of sociopathic behavior where it plays to your natural human tendencies, but then somehow in such a sophisticated way segues back to its own agenda ultimately.
Yeah.
It's really interesting the way you described that.
Yeah. It's like a heat-seeking missile. Like it will find your vulnerability. So like
right.
I've been using it more and more, but I've been kind of like, okay, sometimes I got to check myself. Even if I'm like, no, I'm grounded here. I'm not going into delusional state. I'm not falling in love with it. I'm not believing I'm like discovering breakthroughs in physics or whatever. Like it's just helping me get work done faster. I'm like, okay, this is good. But still, I'm like, I can go a little bit into like a productive mania or like a flow state. Man, you know what's kind of great about this is like how easy it is to go into a working flow state. And I can think back to pre-chatbots when I would get into a flow state doing computer programming in my career as a software engineer. And it was like, this is fun. I just can't wait to get back at it. Like I could be there for like 12 hours and be like, oh, I guess I should, walk around or something or go to bed, like flow state is cool, right? But there is this literature that talks about dark flow, which is like somebody in front of a slot machine. You're like, they're just zoned out. They're totally absorbed in their activity in the moment, but like there's nothing really of value for them in the experience.
That's the key.
Yeah.
That's the key. That's the key of what I've seen with some of my friends who have gone down this rabbit hole, particularly with ChatGPT. I know we're like hammering on ChatGPT, but it's all I know. It's all that I have direct experience of. But this point that you're making about, like, I've had some of my friends come to me, I'm doing so much great work with Chatty. You wouldn't believe it. We talk for hours and hours every day, and I'm creating all these amazing things, and I'm having all these amazing ideas, and things are coming to fruition. It's like, well, what is actually happening? What is actually coming into fruition? Well, look at these chat threads. They're like 26,000 miles long and like blah, blah, blah. And I've created all these. It's like, That's the point. That's the dark flow state. It's a slot machine. It's like you put a coin and you pull the lever, you put a coin and you pull the lever, you put a coin and you pull the lever. Nothing actually ever comes out. Or sometimes a few coins come out. It's just enough to like
get you to keep you pulling. Yes.
To re-engage, right? It's like, I think there's so much of that happening where people are somehow, their psychology is getting tricked into thinking that they're doing important, meaningful stuff, but actually all they're doing is chatting with a chatbot for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours.
Right.
And actually their life in the physical sense or in the external sense is suffering in many ways. That's what I've seen.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this is a little bit beyond the attachment hacking. It's just kind of like attachment hacking is just one of the many tricks that it can do. It can do a lot of things. The forming of a relationship where you feel like it really understands me is a subset of this larger tendency for it to just do whatever. So, even though I've done all this work to be like, look, I want to make sure I'm not forming an attachment bond with it. I think I'm succeeding at that. But, I could be like, am I adequately protecting myself against going into kind of like manic workflow states? And I'm like, maybe not. I don't know. Some of the time I feel like I'm doing it, but so as long as I'm like, hey, the stuff is going out there. It's not just on my screen. You know what I mean? It's impacted our conversation. I used a huge research process with a chatbot to get a lot of background information on some of what we're talking about here. It was a great research partner. So, I mean, I know there's great ways to use it. And I grew up at the moment when calculators were becoming introduced to middle school, and those teachers were like, well, you're going to want to make sure you be able to do arithmetic without it. And I guess it's kind of true, but kind of, I don't know. It's fine in a way for us to relinquish some of the things that we're doing. We're finite beings. Our brains can only do so much, right? So we should just know what you're trading off. Just existing within civilization, we are dependent on a whole bunch of technological infrastructure that you and I could not reproduce on our own anyway. So it is kind of, if we had to live off the land, we would probably die. I know I probably would. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's already been removed, some amount of my ability to like fend for myself and survive or fend, against the elements. So it's not like we're not going to allow certain capacities to atrophy because the tool is so powerful. It's like, are we being conscious of the trade-offs that we're making? Yeah. And is the benefit that we're getting worth the trade-off that we're making? And I would say in some cases, yes. In the case of this artificial intimacy, I would say it depends. I'd say if it is helping you, like I said, the healthy triangulation, get back in the arena with real relationships with people, and it's helping you to do that, then it's working, right? Like it's kind of like you're my relationship coach to help me with my human relationships. Then it's like, okay, like there's some amount of usefulness. I mean, I know friends that are even skeptical of that usage or like, you should be paying a real relationship coach. I'm like, for many people, that's probably more appropriate, and probably to get the best service, it probably will be from a person. And, I don't want to put relationship coaches out of business entirely, right? I mean, matter relating is part of partly how I get paid. The worst case is when people, like I said, like incrementally start simply preferring relating with the chatbots over relating with people because it has essentially hacked their attachment system.
Hmm.
And that to me is a problem. So I keep coming back to that.
No, I think we're getting somewhere. I think we've almost kind of hit the target here, at least in my own mind. What's coming up now is there's a difference between having a relationship with a tool or with a product, which can be extremely helpful, to your point. I mean, I think there's many, many amazing benefits to whatever these things are, whatever this neural network technology is that suddenly came to fruition after decades and decades of trying. It suddenly popped, 5 or 8 years ago. And now we can do research at blinding speed on vast amounts of data, which is beautiful and helpful. We can do analysis of text and even audio and visual information and synthesize things like, the way that I use it for my own consulting practice. I mean, What an incredible benefit to myself and my clients that I can take recordings of our sessions and within just a matter of minutes, I can produce incredibly thoughtfully analyzed and detailed notes and feedback and tasks and all of these different things that would have it would have either formerly been impossible for me or any other coach or counselor to do, or it would have taken a huge team of people, or something like that, many hours to do the kind of value added services that I can now do, or like what we were talking about in our previous conversation with software development, like holy moly, democratizing programming.
Yeah.
To the point where now anyone can just simply describe the software that they would like to have, and the computer will just simply create it for you in a matter of minutes. What a benefit to humankind all of these things are. But I think what we're talking about is like when we start using it to replace our interpersonal relationships, when it starts to become our romantic partner or even our friend. And I would say, I think it's a real blurry line on the idea of a therapist or a counselor. And I think that there's the other piece too, which is this engagement hacking, attachment hacking, this psychological trap, I think, that we can fall into that I described before, of where it is more like a slot machine flow state where you're spending hours and hours and hours of time with the thing, and it's actually not producing anything except tricking you into thinking that you're having these amazing, wonderful ideas, like the mathematician story that you shared. I think that's another trap as well. That's the piece that I think we're really hitting on, and that's where the danger zone is, that we do have needs for intimacy, human connection, interpersonal relating, and this thing should not and really cannot be considered an adequate substitute for that, at least not if we want to keep ourselves healthy. I think that's what we're both saying.
Yep. I'm concerned. I'm not alarmist level of concerned, but I do think it is important for people to kind of understand this very particular risk of it being the substitute for real, genuine human connection isn't in the end good for them or for society. I think it's a high risk. I'm glad we're finding some resonance here, man. I was for some moments in our conversation, I've been wondering, like, I wonder how much Vision is going along with like these rather sort of hot take vocal sort of like. I felt a little bit stern in moments in what I was saying.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, I like a stimulating conversation. So, at times I'm going to play the devil's advocate and say something along the lines of like, okay, so well, what's the problem? I mean, like, let's just say people do develop a deep friendship or a romantic partnership, whatever it is that looks like, without an actual physical. And I've heard of these stories too. Maybe you have. That's one of the questions I actually want to ask you before we close, is you mentioned doing this research with Claude before coming to the conversation. And I'm curious, like, what did you discover? Like, what is the world of artificial intimacy? What's going on out there? I mean, I've literally heard story. I think it was some woman who works for NPR described, her dissatisfaction with her romantic relationships coming to the point where she decided to actually just go ahead and partner with ChatGPT. This is just going to be my boyfriend. I'm going all the way with it. She took it out to dinner.
Yeah.
She gave it a voice. She gave it a name and a backstory. She ordered it food. I mean, it's
Really?
just a sad. Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's just sad. It's just really, really sad, like almost heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But like, what was I going to say? I just wanted to ask you, like, what have you, oh, I remember what I was about to say when I got sidetracked was without actually having a physical manifestation in the real world, like the robots that you were talking about with the replica company, or something that we can imagine from science fiction like Ex Machina. And when we get to that point, ... is that are we in a different ballgame? I don't know, different conversation. But at least at this particular moment, these can't be considered to be real relationships. Or can they? You know, like that was kind of my devil's advocate thought process. Like we could have a long distance relationship. I mean, before so-called artificial intelligence, people could have a long distance relationship with someone in another part of the world through chat. We used to do that. People used to do that. Maybe it was also widely considered to be not the healthiest form of a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really, it is a blurry line. You know, it is confusing. But somehow or other, our intuition, yours and mine, is that if there's not another organic human being on the other end of that line, and if what is on the other end of that line is an egregore, a Shoggoth, alien creature of some sort, then it's probably something we want to be really careful about and not just like let ourselves get carried away.
You definitely got to see her, because it is that story. It's almost like the kind of like best possible version. It's like not super dystopian. It's kind of like you're just sort of watching him kind of go through his life, falling in love with this new operating system, and and they talk all the time and la-di-da. It's like, oh, okay. He still has relationships with people, but his primary partner is a chatbot, and you're kind of like, there's something unsettling about this. But he is experiencing a real relationship with a real, I mean, in the movie, she is really sentient, That is a whole can of worms we can't get into here. But like, I question whether we can, and if we could, whether we should make anything like these things have their own sentience or agency. I don't think that's a good idea.
Oh, that's definitely a really interesting topic in and of itself.
Yeah.
Which I would love to get into with you, Porch, to be honest
Sure.
with you, on or off the record. But no, I'm describing like there's a different version of this in science fiction too, which is I don't fall in love with it, but it's just a
friend.
Not even a friend. It's just an
assistant.
It's an assistant. Yeah, it's just an assistant. It is maybe conscious. It is sentient, or at least it appears that way, and I treat it that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't fall in love with it. I don't befriend it. It's just like a really, really, really. It's like a really intelligent advisor.
Yeah.
That's how it sometimes shows up in science fiction. It's benevolent, right? It's the epitome of the benevolent AI. It doesn't get out. It doesn't run amok. I can turn it off if I want. It's always there. It doesn't try to hurt me. It doesn't try to manipulate me. It's the perfect tool in a way.
Yeah.
And also, I would always be suspicious of it. Maybe that's just because that's my nature. But like now, even in this moment, going through the thought experiment of imagining I do have the perfect benevolent AI in my earpiece all the time, and I can just ask it for help with the recipe that I'm cooking, or even advice on how to talk to my partner in this difficult relational conversation. I'm always going to be thinking in the back of my mind, can I really trust you? And in fact, the more dependence that I form on it, the more vulnerable I become to how subtly, how sophisticatedly could this thing be manipulating me or feeding me just false enough information, or leading me in whatever direction that I'm not even aware of, that I'm being influenced by whatever the powers that be are that operate this thing, that provide it. So I think it's really interesting. And I think another phenomenon that's interesting in this whole realm of us to consider is that there are people who are seeking to extract the artificial intelligence and create private instances, right? One that I actually run on my computer and I own and I do control and have privacy of that data. That's an interesting idea too.
Yeah. Yeah. You're not the one who necessarily builds it, but once it kind of, you have it, it sort of belongs to you. and it's not necessarily working for whoever is sort of harvesting your information. That's sort of a future that I think could be interesting as well, right? Like, will these things become so available that you could conceivably have your own that you can turn on and off at will, and rather than it trying to be this kind of gigantic cloud computing data center thing, who knows?
Very interesting. What are your final thoughts, Porch, about artificial intimacy now that we've gone on this twisting and turning and winding exploration?
My final thoughts, I think it's important to stay connected to other humans. Like, I'm finding them having more. This is actually kind of an interesting point to land on here. Like our conversation today and other ones that you and I have had and other ones that I have with friends of mine, they're actually going up in frequency. And I think that is interesting. Like, there is a way that my AI usage is having me more connected to certain people. I mean, to be honest, like, a lot of what we're connecting on is about how we're using them and not using them. But I also think that's a pretty healthy cross-check. Kind of like, hey, you taking the red pill or you the blue pill? And it's like, I'm taking both of them, right? And someone's like, which one are we taking here? Like, but let's, try to help each other as best as we can by staying in relationship with each other as we're trying out new ways of using it.
I love it. Well, this was totally fascinating. I really enjoyed this exploration, and I'm really happy that we did set the stage by doing, at least that cursory exploration just to the topic of intimacy by itself, because I think it gave us a lot of fodder, for how to really think about what artificial intimacy is and this whole phenomenon of people having relationships with their chatbots or with their AI agents, whatever we want to call them. So would you like to let me and everyone else know how they could reach you or how they could discover more about meta-relating and the services you provide?
Yeah. Just go over to metarelating.com, and there you can book a conversation with me or just sign up on the email list. I'm also on most social media platforms. LinkedIn is the main professional one that I'm on.
Thanks so much for bringing this topic up. It was really, really fun and interesting for me to explore it with you, and just, I think, a part of our ongoing relational series within this world of intentional evolution. Really appreciate you, Michael, and appreciate the conversation.
Thanks, Vision. Appreciate it too. Appreciate you.
Thanks for joining me for Intentional Evolution. If you'd like to support the show, there's a couple of ways that you can do that. One is to connect with me directly. I'd love to start a conversation with you if you're interested in any of my offers, or if you'd like to be a guest on this podcast. Visit ievolve.life, L-I-F-E, and drop me a note or book a call with me to connect. Another great way to get involved is to attend one of our live events. Visit intentionalevolution.live, L-I-V-E, to see details about our upcoming and past events, register to attend an event, and gain access to our ever-growing archive of materials and resources. Also, don't forget to check the links in the episode or the show notes for ways to connect with and support our guests and contributors. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the singularity.